Hello, welcome to Nashville Demystified. I'm your host, Alex Steed. Nashville Demystified is a show in which I get to know the city better by talking with the folks who live, work, agitate, and make art here today. We are talking with artist Kevin Guthrie. I only add the question mark because he's a little reluctant to call himself that, though I believe he's a great artist. He has a show hanging at the Julia Martin Gallery through the end of April called A History of Tofu in America. I think it is brilliant. I love Kevin Guthrie so much. I am glad we got a chance to have this conversation. It's been a minute, by the way, since we were last in touch. You and I appreciate your being here. Just a couple pieces to tell you about before we get further into the introduction. If you like this show, I have another show that I co-host with my friend Sarah Marshall. She hosts a show called You're Wrong About that some people know about. And we have a movie podcast called You Are Good. It's a feelings podcast about movies. We're not watching movies through a critical lens. We're watching them through a lens of understanding ourselves and the people who we share this experience with better. So, what's going on now? We talked about Heathers recently, and it was a great opportunity to discuss high school and how weird of a place that is. So check that out at You Are Good, wherever you listen to podcasts. Nashville Demystified, of course, is distributed by We Own This Town, which is a collection of podcasts made by and for Nashvillians. If you like the show, you'll like the shows on that network. There's just a bunch of different shows by a bunch of different Nashvillians talking about a bunch of different things. So if you're not familiar, check out those shows as soon as you are able. Thank you so much to We Own This Town for distributing Nashville Demystified. So Kevin Guthrie has been on the show before. He was on our David Berman tribute a couple years back. He read from Berman's blog. Kevin and David were friends, and I was just truly blown away that Kevin was willing and interested to offer his voice to that tribute. David Berman meant a whole hell of a lot to me, and I believe to a lot of people in this city. So I was glad to have Kevin be a part of that. But that's how we originally got in touch. We've stayed in touch. We tried to have this interview another time, but technical difficulties got in the way. When that happens, you're always like, ugh, God, oh no, like, what are we going to do? The interview didn't work, but it led to a second interview. And often a second interview is great because you're already comfortable and have some rapport and you get some good nuggets out of the second round that you didn't necessarily get out of the first. So that's what you are about to listen to in this conversation with Kevin. I don't have a ton to add that we don't talk about in the actual exchange outside of just like Kevin's fantastic. Kevin's art's great. I went to the show at Julia Martin. I bought a couple of the pieces that were related to the Source family, which we talk about in this episode, because I love weirdos. And I think Kevin's a bit of a weirdo in the best way possible. I think his art is by and for weirdos. And I think his lens, the stuff that he's looking at, the stuff that he's trying to get closer to in his art, particularly stuff like the Source family, that's some weirdo shit. That's my favorite stuff. I'm grateful for what he does. So I'm glad that we have this conversation. I'm glad that you're here to listen to it. This is going to be a week of 2 episodes. After not being around for a while, we're going to have a couple episodes. Our next is going to come out on Record Store Day, and it's an interview with Mary Mancini, who, among many, many other things in this fine city, was the owner of Lucy's Record Shop. And I thought Record Store Day would be a perfect time for that. She's got some stuff to talk about as it relates to Lucy's. And it was an incredibly touching conversation. I thought we were going to just have some 90s history time, which is one of my favorite times to have. But we got even deeper than that. And I really appreciate that Mary talked with me about that time. And I'm glad that I think we both got like a little vulnerable about what that era meant to us and about what record shops meant to us and about what scenes meant and still mean to us. And it was a lovely conversation. So I hope you'll join for that. And then finally, let's talk with the great artist, Kevin Guthrie. Kevin Guthrie.
Hey, Alex.
Who are you? Introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. I'm Kevin Guthrie, and we are here to talk about the 1998 Kentucky Derby.
I thought we were here to talk about the monkeys.
Let's talk about the monkeys.
You might see the monkey tonight.
I'm hoping to see the monkey tonight. That would be Mickey Dolenz
at the Ryman.
Yeah. I wonder when the last time there was an act at the Ryman who has had Jimi Hendrix as an opener.
That's a great question.
I mean,
did the Monkees they had Hendrix as an opener?
Yeah, and it was fantastic. Mickey Dolenz, I think, was the one that found him, and it was like right when Jimi Hendrix like kind of popped all at once after years of playing guitar. But yeah, they took him on tour, and like the audience didn't know what to do, and he left after about a week.
Yeah,
but there's footage of it.
Oh my god,
he was wonderful. Like it's great looking, and
oh, it's so good. So Kevin,
yes,
I don't even know where to start. How would you characterize what you do in the world
right now? I've been, especially since the pandemic, I haven't done much else. Been making, in air quotations, artwork, where I take recycled boxes. Mostly, I like beer boxes. With the circles where the tops of the cans are, and cut them up and go to town with my crayons and pencils. And I've started to add some paint and trying to make kind of obscure historical analysis of things. And my interests are a wide variety between sports and politics and current events.
And you just had a show at Julia Martin Gallery.
Julia Martin Gallery in the Wedgwood, Houston neighborhood of Nashville, Tennessee. Julia's an old friend of mine that I met years ago when I first moved here, and she had a studio right across from where I was working. She would come over and have a beer when she would take a break. And we became friends, and she had gallery shows, and we just became socially good friends. And she opened this gallery, and I moved into an apartment with a roommate, and she's like, Kevin, you have to quit smoking. And I was like, okay. So I quit smoking, and with my spare time, I just started drawing on my recycled beer boxes that needed to go out to the recycling bin. And I ended up just drawing on them and liking it instead of smoking and collected 20 or 30 of them. I just had them laying around and no one saw them. And when I turned 50, my friends had a nice birthday party for me at a restaurant. And as a joke, I gave these out. And I gave one to Julia, and she's like, you're doing a show. So I did. I put some more of those in, and then like I just kept at it. And anyway, the show that I just did, for some reason, I took an interest in the history of vegetarianism, maybe for health reasons, I think. During the pandemic, I don't know if you had the issue. Did you put on any weight?
Oh God, I do. I was at the doctor the other day, the first time in like a real way in a couple of years. And my issue was less weight related and more heart.
Oh yeah,
like heart stuff.
Okay.
And they were like, "You gotta tone it down."
Are they putting you on like blood thinners,
down, buddy.
kind of a thing? Oh yeah.
No, we're gonna start with me actually. I took 2 years in which I was just like cake for a couple meals a day,
exactly,
sure, whatever. And
exactly.
it's now I gotta pretend like I want to live. So I hear you. So you were trying to.
So I have same issues with me, although I haven't had a doctor tell me that, but I know that's what he would say,
totally.
or she, or they. So I don't know. It's kind of the history of tofu in America is what the working title of the show was. The history of tofu in America, and that expanded to include like the vegetarian stuff I'd been thinking of for I don't know. I guess health was on the back of my mind.
Yeah.
And there's a fascinating history in the little town where I live north of, I think you live up there too, in Madison.
I sure do.
Now, you live off of Neely's Bend, correct?
I do.
Yeah. That's kind of where my show starts. The first portrait in there, it's a series of 30 pieces that all have to do with the subject matter, is of Ellen White, who was a very powerful member of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. She grew up born in Maine, I believe. Similar to you.
Nice connection.
And one of her big things was vegetarianism as well as preaching the gospel. And she wanted to set up shop in the war-torn South. So they were looking for a place, and they were kind of used Nashville as a central point where they were like going out to different parts in the area and looking for places. And they were on a riverboat cruise up the Cumberland, and the boat broke down. They docked at Neely's Bend and got off. And she said, this is it. Put a factory there where they would can fresh vegetables. And that was very successful. And they had a meat substitute made out of nuts. And that was one of their main products. And it ended up being, in the 30s, was shipped to grocery stores all over North America.
Yeah.
And the factory was active.
And it was called Nut Meat.
That was the product. Yeah, nut meat. They had something called nut roast.
Yeah.
That was probably special for Sunday.
When you were like, I'm interested in vegetarianism, like, were you thinking specifically of tying it to the area and going from there? Or was that like a nugget of history that you had in your brain already?
No, that was something. Well, that was a conversation I had with a friend of mine, Pete Finney, told me all about that. And we also talked about Stephen Gaskin, who is famous for starting the farm down in Summertown, Tennessee. When he was in the 60s, was a professor in San Francisco, and he was really into experimental drugs. He taught English, and people that even weren't students would come to his lectures. It'd be 300 people. So he had followers. He decided to put his money where his mouth is the way I like to put it. And they drove a caravan of school buses out to the South and again looked for a place to set up and open a self-sustaining commune farm, and it worked. And it's just like right on the Alabama border.
Right on.
And it's like wildly successful today. They still have all of that, but they make solar panels. His wife, Ina May, is like one of the top doulas in the country. So they still do a lot of good work. He passed away about 8-9 years ago. But he's very interesting too, like tons of great. They had a rock band. And then I just kept looking, and I found like 4 viable reasons or how tofu even came to be like 2,500 years ago. And I just ran with the most preposterous, ridiculous one of them and did a portrait of this guy named Luann, who was working on a potion to live forever. And he was also taking care of his grandmother at the same time, and she wanted some beans, and he made her some soup. She couldn't chew, and he accidentally spilled some like sea salt or something, and it coagulated and turned into tofu. And that's a really far-fetched legend. And then he killed himself running from the law or something. But he was like the king or prince of his province in China.
What a spectacular origin story.
Yeah.
So how was the show overall? How did it feel?
I was overwhelmed. There's so many people now.
I was there. There were so many people.
Popular thing. It's a social event of the month, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly it was like packed. It was great.
Yeah.
It was great to see everyone sort of engaging with the art. So focusing on tofu, right? Do you need something like a banner or like a category to like keep you focused, or was that just specific for the show?
I do. Yeah, I do. I need help self-editing. Like the 2 other big shows that I've done here, one was I did all of Muhammad Ali's professional opponents. He had 61 pro fights. So I did 61 portraits, and that was, all right, this is what I have to do. I can't throw people in. He didn't fight Butterbean. You know, I'd like to have done a portrait of Butterbean. And then the next one I did was all about the first pro baseball game I went to when I was a kid. And I found the box score, and I saw all the plays, how the scores happened, and who batted and who did what. And all this information was very helpful, so I did a portrait of everybody that played in the game. And unfortunately, Willie Mays was on, shows how old I am, Willie Mays was near the end of his career, and sat on the bench the whole time, so I couldn't use him. I couldn't put Willie Mays in there.
He was in the proximity, but
and then the next day, he had a home run. You know.
Oh my God!
Yeah.
Are you originally from here?
I grew up right outside of Richmond, Virginia.
Okay.
2 little small towns. I kind of split my time evenly near Fredericksburg, this town called Bowling Green, Virginia, which is pretty historic, and then this town near Chesapeake Bay called West Point, Virginia. So they're 2 like less than 1,000 people.
What brought you to Nashville?
That's what I keep asking myself.
What brought you to Nashville?
As soon as I got out of college, you know, when I turned 30,
it took me 6.5 years.
I went to college at VCU in Richmond, Virginia, and then I wanted to get out of town so bad. So I lived all over the place. I moved to New York for a few years. I was in the city there, and then I moved to San Francisco for a number of years. Then I lived in Louisville, Kentucky, which is wonderful. I lived there for about close to 10 years. I moved here because we're pretty close to Louisville, and I had seemingly had more friends down here than I did in Louisville, and I just was ready for a change.
What was Louisville like then?
I imagine it's the same as it is now. I don't go up there too much anymore, but it's real up there, man.
Yeah.
It's real. There's not a lot of posturing as you might see around this town.
Sure.
You know? The music seems great. Like there's all these like incredible musicians that play just this weird music. To me, it's seated in like that 80s college rock that I like. That was like kind of like metal, but kind of like slow jazz or something. I don't know. They call it math rock. It's kind of like it's still like
I love
it's still in the air. up there in Louisville in a good way. Like, it's really,
I was just looking through old issues of the Oxford American. They had like an early-ish, I forget what album it must have been, but it was like an early-ish Bonnie Prince Billy review. Might have been Palace. Might have been, and I was just like, that must have been fun to know about in real time as it happened, because like you just tell people like, what's happening here? Like, this guy's clearly a genius, but like what is occurring here?
I know Will a little bit. I'm good friends with his brother Paul. But when I moved there, Will was already kind of like a big deal. So he would play in Louisville like once every 2 years. And it would be at like Headliners or someplace sort of like the Brown Theater. I would love to have been around because he's not that much younger than me. I would have loved to have seen him like come up and playing in those bands, like he was all part of that, like Slint and all those guys. Totally. 8, he was right in there.
I saw Slint on that 2005 reunion
tour.
Weren't
they great?
Yeah. It was like listening. I mean, sometimes this is a complaint. In this case, it wasn't like a complaint. It was like listening to the record. They were like, they're doing it.
That's just so
hating
cool
each other, I think.
Yeah. I don't know how much that was calculated or how much was Steve Albini, that record that he produced of theirs, like. But I mean, just the way that the drums and guitar and the soft vocals.
Oh my God.
You barely hear it. It's like,
haunting.
What? Yeah, it's great.
I love it.
Yeah.
You've been in proximity to a bunch of fantastic music.
Yeah.
Like, you've been around and like working with folks who are doing stuff. So like, how did that happen?
I was friends back in the day in college, back in Richmond, with Steve West, who plays drums in Pavement. And he and I and his band, we all moved to New York and shared a flat together, a house together, apartment together. Or he went to high school with Bob Stanovich, and that was right when Pavement was starting. And Bob and David and I think Malcolmus too at the time, they were all living in Hoboken. So we went over to visit and like went to a show at Maxwell's, and I met those guys then. And then Bob was like, man, I'm in this band and we're not like good, but people love us. And this,
we're not good, but people love us. It's like the motto of all my favorite bands.
They'd only play like 3 times or something like that. Like, it wasn't anywhere. I think it was a different lineup altogether. Like, I don't even know if Mark was playing in the band at that point. So anyway, I just became friends with them. Then I ended up moving to San Francisco a couple years later, and they were getting big then. So I would like see them out in California and like hung out. Like, I rode down with them from San Francisco to LA, and like they couldn't bring a dog on tour, so they brought me. Same sort of entertainment value.
Fantastic.
And when they did their reunion tour in 2010, I'd already done some of that kind of work with David Berman and the Silver Jews. David asked me to go on and like introduce them and try to do a little stand-up comedy before the Silver Jews shows, which didn't go that great.
People weren't ready for comedy.
No, they want to see this guy who hasn't toured ever. But no, let me hold you up for...
It's such a fucking fun... That itself is a funny joke, is like Berman being like, go tell some jokes.
Yeah. He even put it like advertising as like country comedy with Kevin Guthrie and Corny Crow. I'm like, what the fuck is that? I mean, do like a puppet act? Like Waylon and Madam or some shit. But that morphed into me doing merch, and then that morphed into me like helping out with driving and like making hotel arrangements and stuff. And then when Pavement did their huge thing in 2010, I was just asked to come along and handle their merch, which was major. Like, it was a lot of work.
People wanted to buy merch in 2010.
4 and 5 at a time, and like it's like but it was great. That's great,
That's fantastic.
And I know those guys really well for the most part individually. I don't know Scott. Scott always lives in like Mexico or Australia or somewhere. It's not like you run into him ever.
Right. He's just like not on the street. I lived at an apartment in the early aughts, and there was a stray orange cat that everyone had their own name for, and one person named it Pear Jambone, and I named it Steve Malcolmus. So,
that's nice.
So we had a little Pavement around all the time.
Yeah.
And how did you know Berman?
Because David was living in New York too.
Oh, okay.
And Steve West, when he was my housemate, got a job. They were all security guards at the old Whitney Museum.
Oh yes.
So I would go there all the time. We just let us know, we'll put you on the list. So I went like every other week. They would write these little notes because they were bored just standing around, and they would write these little notes that would say like, fuck you, like tiny, like the size of your fingertip, and roll them up And like they could like the walls were soft in this one part. They could like stick them in there. It was like a game for them to try to find these like Easter eggs of like fuck you notes to each other.
Beautiful. What did you learn from all that time? I mean, that's like those are two unreal bands to be around and to be friends with and to be around while they're like out doing the thing.
To me, they were just my friends that were just doing stuff. And they just kind of like right place, right time is kind of how I thought about it. I didn't like put them in the same realm as REM or a band like that, you know. So they were just dudes that like didn't put on stage clothes. They just whatever they had that morning, that's what they wore on stage that night, and like ate regular food and lived in regular apartments and didn't sleep around on their spouses and girlfriends. It's kind of lame, actually. I got ripped off.
Yeah, I would say like from like a personal standpoint, I can't imagine like a more not politically conservative, but like a more like personally conservative group of people.
Yeah, no, they're great. No, their longtime legendary Dutch soundman Remco, he had a lot of that rock star in him.
Sure,
in a great way, not in an obnoxious way, in a great way.
I know that you said you started the process of making what you're making by way of art. Well, you said when you were 50.
Yeah, it's like 8 years ago.
But were you making anything before that, or like how were you concentrating your creative energy?
I don't think I was. I had I'd gotten a small part. I got cast in Harmony Korine's magnum opus Trash Humpers.
Wait, are you in Trash Humpers?
Yeah.
No, you're not.
Yeah, I'm one of the the conjoined twins.
Kevin, I had no idea.
Yeah.
Well, that's some history.
Harmony like asked me right after the first of the year in 2009. He told me about this idea for a film, and he wasn't sure. He wanted me to be in it, but he didn't really know what the film was going to be yet. And he kind of had pictures of like the initial pictures of what the Trash Humpers themselves were going to look like,
Sure.
and like walk through the alley. And when he told me they were going to be literally having sex with trash cans, I was like, in my mind, I wasn't thinking plastic dumpsters. I was thinking old school metal.
The metal, yeah.
The metal ones where you
that's
drill
exactly
a hole.
Where I went
like,
to, yeah.
That's what I was like. like an old metal trash can with a glory hole in it, you know? I was like, man, as long as my mother doesn't see it, I'll do that, you know?
Sure. Did she see it? She hasn't seen it.
No, she's aware of it, though.
Okay.
She's aware
She
of
knows
it.
about Trash
Yeah,
Humpers. How
she
did you
just
know
doesn't-
Harmony?
Through David.
Okay.
Through David.
Yeah.
And like I'd gone to dinner with him a few times, and he and Rachel are great. You
Really?
know? I think they've got 3 kids now. They just had their 3rd kid. They live in Miami.
Wow.
I don't see him too much. We chat, you know, online about once a year.
I've been spending a lot of time in the Nashville scene archive. And by a lot of time, I've spent like 3 whole days there. It's not a ton of time, but I've been looking through I was just looking through all the 1997 archive, and that's when Gummo came out.
Oh, yeah.
And Gummo got a real bad review by the Nashville scene.
Really?
And I was like, I wonder if that hurt.
Yeah.
Because it's like your backyard, you know?
Yeah.
It was bad, but I think it kind of like ended with like, it's still kind of like worth checking out. But like it was kind of scathing too. And I was like, I wonder how Harmony dealt with that. It feels like that's a lot to deal with when you
I admire that
hometown
guy
paper.
for like,
Oh, Kids
Yeah.
I saw Kids when I was 12, and it was like extremely formative.
Yeah.
Like I was like, this is like a real teen movie.
yeah, that movie kind of messed with me too. I didn't know him at the time. You know, no one did.
Yeah.
And I saw that. Yeah, I was living in San Francisco when that came out. Like the scene that always gets me is the guy in the subway that's like rolling around.
Yeah, on the skateboard. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know why that's the scene that just sticks out in my mind.
There's so many pieces of that movie that feel, as much as it's not documentary, it feels documentary.
Yeah.
You know, like there's all those pieces that they pick up and all that flavor, which is pretty intense.
Yeah.
I had no idea you had a Trash Humpers connection. So that was your previous creative outlook.
I was in that.
Was you were in Trash Humpers.
I got a couple of other acting parts here and there, but I got an acting agent who, you know, she's a pro and I'm not. And she's like, all right, well, there's a commercial audition you have to tape for. And I'm like, a commercial? I'm not going to do a commercial. And I ended up doing a bunch of like commercial auditions, like half-assed and half-hearted. But I did manage to get 3 of those. Have you been injured in an accident?
Oh, yeah. Hell yeah.
I did 3 of those. Those are cool, though. It only takes 30 minutes. You get $100.
They're beautiful.
And I was like, no, this isn't shown in Nashville. They're like, no. This can be in, where is this one? This can be in Little Rock. I'm like, fine. I don't know anybody there.
That's fantastic.
And then, then I started doing the drawing thing. And I was working all the time in restaurants the whole time, just getting burnt out. Like, too old for that kind of
It's
kind
hard,
of
man.
lifestyle. Like that's for 30-year-olds at the oldest.
At the oldest, yeah.
You know.
I still do, like, once a year, I run the Farmer's Kitchen at a music festival in Maine. It used to be my for fun thing when I started it in my 20s, and now I'm just like, this is my last year. This is too much
What do y'all serve?
to my body. So it's like at a string camp and then partially at a festival. And so we just basically just like buy a bunch of stuff from farmers and then turn it into whatever we're able to turn it into that day or the
Not
next
really
day or whatever.
seafood though.
No, it's inland.
Is it true that you can get lobster at McDonald's? I mean,
I don't think so.
okay. I thought that
I
was
don't
an
think
urban
so.
myth.
I think maybe occasionally there's a lobster roll, but I don't know. I don't think so.
Do you know of any place that makes Cajun style gumbo, but using like the mussels,
Yeah,
and
oh, yeah.
shrimp and all that stuff from up there?
Yeah, that's a
locally sourced lobster and everything.
That's a thing that
It is a
happens.
thing. God, I
for
bet
sure.
that's awesome.
You know, as far as anything that's like Cajun or in proximity, there's not a whole lot of like that
Right, yeah,
culture. So
yeah,
like I think you end up missing flavor.
Yeah. There's one
It's not big
interesting
up there.
person I met. I went when I was in England with Pavement. And Mark Eibold was so excited that this guy was coming to the show. And it was like this, he must have been in his 70s, this really old man who was like the pitmaster of London. I'm like, what?
Wow.
It's like, there's barbecue in London? I guess that's a thing, but it's not.
Yeah.
It's not like going to Memphis.
It's a London barbecue.
Yeah, it's-
That's exactly
but
what you'd
he's
expect.
like, he's the best at it.
So you've been here. You've been in the city for 20 years.
Pretty close, yeah.
And what-
15, 16.
And we were just talking about how you can't park around Julia's Gallery anymore. You used to live in Julia's Gallery. Not when
Right.
it was Julia's Gallery.
Yeah,
but you
yeah,
used to live
yeah.
in
Our
that
friend
space.
Lonnie owns the building, and I needed a place, and he had just bought it and was fixing it up. And this is like an old house. I think this might have been like a house that like one of the boss men lived in. But this whole neighborhood was littered with like tiny little houses that look exactly the same. Those for the workers. That's what this neighborhood was. So this is one of the remaining buildings, and Lonnie fixed it up with an idea that this neighborhood was going to explode. You know, he's got his recording studio. He's got 2 units upstairs, like this one, and Julie's Gallery. And I lived there while he was fixing it up. And his studio's in the basement, and he had to dig out 2 feet in the basement to make it work.
Yeah.
He had like little tractors down there digging up dirt like it hadn't been disturbed forever, you know.
Sure.
And all that stuff just like swept up through my floorboards, and my house is just filled with like this ancient dirt. And the smell was something I've never smelled before. It wasn't bad or anything. It was just very minerally, you know, and gas fumes.
Yeah.
So that was great.
When you did get here, like, what
Yeah.
were you taken by?
Probably like a line from one of David's songs, "The Hot Middle-Aged Women."
From Tennessee.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, honestly, and I just had a bunch of friends like his bandmates at the time became great friends of mine. Tony Crow, that guy, and Brian Kotzer and his wife are amazing. William Tyler, of course, they're all like, I'm friends with his parents and sister. I'm friends with all of them. They feel like family to me, you know.
I almost bought a house from William's parents.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, they had one for sale, and like Toby Leonard from the Belcourt is friends with them, and
Yeah.
he was like really trying to push me buying their house, and the timing just didn't line up. But I was like, it's so funny how people joke that it's a small town, but like this is a fucking small town.
Yeah. I don't know how, you know, Dan Tyler's a great guy too. He wrote a book. You should I'll try to find a copy for you. He wrote like a mystery. It's like a page turner of and what Nashville was like in like the late 70s or early 80s.
great.
It's very much like reading a Kinky Friedman book.
That's great. I spend time, you know, at the library and in archives. Like that's like what I do for fun. Like that is my art. And this is a city that has like shockingly little written about it. Like outside of the context of country music. And even in the context of that, I mean, obviously there's a lot written about country in a particular time. There's a lot written about the civil rights struggle here, rightfully. And there's a great archive at the Nashville Public Library about that. But it's very difficult to find stuff that's like, what was life like for anyone who was not in country music or involved in the civil rights fight? Like it's kind of shocking.
I wonder if there's much about the time that Elvis spent here, because he recorded a lot in Nashville.
Yeah. I think that there is some around that, but anything that's outside of just like, what did a janitor do? Like, there's just like there aren't rich histories about anything that isn't 1 degree away from the music scene.
I think that there was, and Louisville is still kind of like this. I think there's I think there's two Nashvilles.
Oh, of course.
And I think
explain
there's
them.
two
Explain them
Louisvilles.
as far as you're concerned.
I think there's a white Nashville,
Mm-hmm.
and I think there's an African American Nashville, and they both have their own cultures, and they cross some, but for the most part, and it's not like that anymore. But I think it was
Sure.
obviously, probably every city in America was, but it was like that in Nashville. And what often happens is African American history kind of doesn't get the attention to detail,
Right.
in regards to history.
Right.
Yeah, but when you hear it, it's
say,
great. But when it's there, it's like it's a jewel. It's like, man, like all that stuff that's like kind of getting revived on Jefferson Street, like
Sure.
the galleries, and like hopefully they'll get more live music over there and stuff. That was like being in Harlem of the South
Yeah.
back in the day.
Yeah.
You know, but there's very little documentation
There,
of it.
totally, and that is a thing. I mean, and I know that I know Vanderbilt has a series that's coming out, like a series of books that's coming out about sort of like decades of Nashville history. I think, and I hope that these are things that get covered a bit in there, because I just spend, like, without exaggeration, like a fucking extraordinarily substantial nerd. I just spend a lot of time like reading the Tennessean.
Yeah.
Like the
great.
old
Right.
Tennessee, to try to like understand that now increasingly in the scene.
Yeah.
The banner, like there's
All right.
not a lot of consolidated history about the city. It's kind of a bummer.
And, you know, one thing I learned is like people that are from here, Nashville, I guess, has no problem tearing down historic buildings. Like, you know, we were talking about the Ryman earlier, like it was almost gone. It was almost going to be torn down at one point. You know, that was before I moved here, but they still talk about how close it came.
Right.
Do you know that place in Madison? It's a fairly new car wash called Rock and Roll Car Wash.
Yeah.
Do you know what that spot used to be?
I don't.
They tore it down, but they tore it down just like 3 years ago. It was a house, but it looked like it had been like an insurance agent's office from the 80s.
Yeah.
That was Colonel Tom Parker's office.
That's amazing.
And that's where Elvis slept and stayed whenever he was in town. And like there's old people in my neighborhood that remember those when he would come and they would see like the pink Cadillac and they're like, oh, Elvis is in town.
Right.
And like they tore it down and now it's a rock and roll car wash. No plaque, no nothing, like, you know.
No info. Oh, that's wild. There was a house in Portland, Maine that was like a shoe repair place. And then it wasn't for anything for a super long time. It was like a pretty abandoned spot, but it was like well known as a place that Kurt Cobain squatted once, and like people were like, "You can't tear it down." Kurt Cobain squatted there. It's like it's condemned, guys. We can't, like, that's not enough historical significance. But Tom Parker's place, you'd think there'd be a plaque.
Yeah, that's funny about Kurt Cobain.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even know if it's true, but people are like, it is true. Like this definitely happened. When you were working with both the Jews and Pavement, is that a thing that you were doing like regularly, or is that just a thing that came up like when it came up you were doing it?
Just one-offs. Like, you know, the Pavement thing was in 2010. Although back, you know, in the late 90s when they would tour every other year, I would go and see them play for like a week at a time, and I would help the merch guy out. I would help with driving, stuff like that. I remember one time they needed a rental van returned from Chicago to Indianapolis or something, and I did that for them on the way back. But mainly, I just did that to like get backstage and drink their beer on their rider,
Right,
you know?
rightfully so. I mean, it's there, you know.
And then they gave me some money to help out and do the merch. With David at the time, you know, like this could end tomorrow. Like he could just cancel this tour right now if there's a show he didn't like, you know. But he managed to get through both those. It was a few shows in 2006. It was a long one in 2008. I think he had it in his mind to do 40 days and 40 nights.
Right.
So we did like 40 shows in 41 days.
That's wild.
Because somebody in the band had told him, it's like, man, these days off are costing us money. So the next time he's like, oh, really? All right.
Yeah.
See what you think about days off now.
Yeah, totally. And then it's like this lack of days off is driving us nuts.
Yeah, and actually what probably led to him being, I don't want to do this anymore.
Right.
Like he had to like live being like responsible for everything, that micromanage everything about the image of the Silver Jews. It was just too much for him, you know. I don't blame him for quitting when he did.
Yeah.
I wish he'd come back sooner with music, but he was content for the most part for the 10 years in between records.
You're a fan of sports generally. I know that he was was it football exclusively? Or?
Yeah, he didn't. Yeah, it was exclusively football.
Were you guys like football buddies?
Yeah, we were. We played fantasy football and we would watch games together. He liked he liked the order of football, and he liked the uniforms. Everybody wore a uniform that you couldn't see their faces.
Yeah.
They seemed like almost unreal or something. Yeah, he liked football. I remember one time his father-in-law came down from Louisville and had tickets to a basketball game. University of Louisville was playing a special game here in Nashville. And I went with Brian because I wanted to go see the game. And we didn't know David was there, and David saw us and came over, and he was just miserable. And one time we took him to a Preds game. He was miserable and left in the second period.
That's amazing.
One time, he and Brian and I went to a Titans game, and David hadn't been with us before. And we used to like stand in the concourse because we had cheap seats, but it was better. We could run around, and we stood like in the end zone at the top of the concourse. So when we walk in, we thought David knew this, but we said, all right, I had to go to the bathroom. We'll see you in the end zone. David tried to go down on the field and climb over the fence and get onto the field to stand in the end zone because that's where he thought we were. So as soon as we walked in, we lost him for the whole game.
That's amazing.
Yeah. See you in the end zone.
Oh, my God. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Around that time when you first got here, were you active in like checking out music that was playing here?
Pretty much, kind of. I did more of that in my younger. I was in my 40s, early 40s when I moved here, so I didn't have it in me to go out there every night.
I'm 38 right now. I'm very very close to 39. I go to shows and like I love being there and stuff, but like it's very hard to self-motivate to get there. And then it's very hard to stay when I'm very obviously the oldest person who's there.
Oh, yeah. You know what? That's not going to get better, that feeling, but still go to shows. That's only going to like amplify. When I was in England, I was up with some friends of mine up in North England in Hull, and I went to a rock show, and it was packed with like everybody. It was a cross section of like old and young. I was like, you know what? This is cool. Like, there's no sort of like judgment from the young people looking at the old people for being at the same event.
Yeah.
So I just kind of roll with that mindset when I'm always the oldest one.
Well, I think it's one of those things where it's like it's a narcissism on my part because I assume that like people even give a shit that there's an old guy there, and it's like those people have no idea that I'm there. Like that's That's like there's a particular narcissism of thinking that you're hated for just existing. Oh my God.
Absolutely.
So you in your art, I loved that you had two in your show at Julia's gallery. I loved that you had two nods to the Source family.
Yes.
Loved it.
Yeah.
I love the work generally, but like those in particular, it felt like just a beautiful, because I think your art's a little weird.
Yeah.
And I think you spending time focusing on people who are a little weird, like Beautiful Losers are my favorite people.
Right.
And so how did you get, because I mean, I'm speaking from experience. So how did you get to the Source family, and like why was that something that you wanted to document in some way?
They got on my radar from the Drag City documentary from about 10 years ago.
Oh, I didn't realize Drag City did that documentary.
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. And I love that documentary, and it's always stuck with me. And like, it kind of like turned into a little bit of like vegetarian cults, and it was just a natural to do something with them. Yeah, it's a cult, but it wasn't like a David Koresh thing where they were like stockpiling weapons.
Right. They went in another direction.
They were a fairly benevolent group, I think, in those regards. Although that guy was also, he got away with murder.
Yeah.
He was an armed bank robber to finance his restaurants.
Yeah.
But he was charismatic as hell.
Exactly.
And he made a mean herb lemon vinaigrette.
Can you just say who the Source was?
The Source family was in Hollywood, was in Los Angeles in the late 60s, early 70s. James Baker is the cult leader's name, and he owned a restaurant called the Source Restaurant, which was the first like really expansive vegetarian restaurant in Hollywood, and like they made smoothies which were new at the time, and like alfalfa sprout salads and all that kind of stuff. And the food supposedly was really good, but the vibe there was like all these like beautiful young people wearing white robes working there. So all the Hollywood hipsters ate there all the time.
Yeah.
And it became a
it was
famous
like
place.
It was like eating at a place hosted by the Polyphonic Spree.
Yeah. Oh, I don't say it like that.
I don't say it in a bad way. I was just,
Yeah,
They had uniforms.
And so he was really into like yoga and stuff. And I guess he had a bit of a Jesus complex or something. So he kind of like took all these young hippies in, and they ended up renting a big house, like a mansion in the Hollywood Hills. And apparently there was some sort of crossover, like he was giving a girl a ride home from work the night that the Sharon Tate murders happened. Mm-hmm. Something happened along the same timeline as the Sharon Tate thing. As the cult grew and expanded, and they had their house that they rented in the Hollywood Hills, and all the neighbors were like worried that it was going to become a Charles Manson type of thing. Mm-hmm. So they kind of got run out of town, and they had enough money to move to Hawaii, and they bought some land in Hawaii and sold a restaurant, which has been a number of places.
I told you at the opening that I was in that building before I knew what it was or before I knew the history. And I'm not like a person who like regularly is like, this place has bad vibes, but that place had bad vibes. And I did not know why. I didn't know like what it was related. I was like looking for like beams. I was like, is it because of how it's built? Like I had no idea. I ended up asking someone later because no one in the restaurant had any idea about the history of it. So I asked someone later and figured out the background.
That's weird that no one knew.
This is no commentary on what it was, but it was a Cabo Cantina, which is Sammy Hagar's tequila restaurant. It was staffed accordingly, and I don't think esoteric Los Angeles history was on anyone's mind.
Man, could you imagine being in a cult led by Sammy Hagar?
No, thank you. There's a great story in An Old Believer by Devendra Banhart talking about getting into a fist fight with Sammy Hagar, which I can only imagine was a scene.
Devendra Banhart and Sammy Hagar got in there?
Yeah, totally. Because I guess like Devendra was playing a show somewhere, and Sammy Hagar, I think, came in and was very belligerent.
Yeah,
and then was just like belligerent in the crowd and was yelling requests for his own music. And then like Banhart, who you would not imagine this would happen, I think like got on stage and like grabbed him by the mop of hair and like
enough's enough.
And if this is not true, I believe it's true. I remember it was like from like 2002 or 2003 that I read it. And if it's not true, let's just believe that it's true.
Oh, yeah,
because it's a lot more fun to think that happened if it didn't.
It happened. Just like the guy that invented tofu.
Yeah. So this is what I like so much about the fact this was your focus of the show is I think like if you like anything, right? If you like any single thing, it's fun to consider all the avenues through which it got to your experience. And so to think that it came from that myth that you had talked about, and then it came in part and was popularized by Seventh-day Adventist in Madison and by a friggin' cult in Los Angeles. Like, that's how stuff gets to you.
Yeah.
Through a culmination of all this shared history.
I soon found out that I needed to, like, use my own thoughts. I didn't have a list of things I needed to do, so that's why half of the show is fake magazine covers. For a fake magazine I made up called Tofu Digest. And like I strategically put like the dates so it would span 120 years. Mm-hmm. And I put like a fake table of contents that you could read underneath it. But I wanted it to be like, is this like a tractor magazine? Is it like a food magazine? Sure. Lifestyle? Is it like, I almost did like a fake Bat Boy from the like National Enquirer one. But I left that out. It was silly. But I made it expand 120 years, and I kept putting that there was a reporter with a scoop, and his name was Colby Rennett. I just made that up. And like the timeline is he'd have to be like 130 years old at the end. Like he's still writing. His first article was 120 years ago.
Still writing for Tofu Digest? I love his commitment. I love any situation in which a magazine can make it to 120 years.
Yeah.
Do you have a focus for, I always hate asking anyone when they're working on one thing that they want people to look at to ask what they're working on next. But I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
What is your area of focus next?
I think I'm still narrowing that down, but I'm going to do a couple of porn star portraits. Mm. And one of them is interesting. Do you remember that disco classic, More, More, More?
Yes, I do.
How do you like it?
Yes, absolutely.
By Andrea True.
Sure.
She was a porn star.
Oh, cool.
And she's from Nashville.
Really?
She was like really successful, like teenage musician. She had her own afternoon TV show that she hosted when she was like 13 or 14 in Nashville. I've never seen any clips or any images of it. But she went on and became like a fairly successful porn star. She made some movies in Jamaica. And at the time, there was a new, like, hard-nosed president that came in and said, anybody that's not Jamaican that's here making money, you either have to leave your money here or you have to spend your money here. And she had just made some money, so she decided, she had been writing songs. She studied music at Vanderbilt. She made that song with like hired musicians in studio time.
Wow.
And like she made more off of her porn money.
Yeah.
And then like made a few more albums, I guess.
Oh, that's
and still
remarkable.
was making porn. So I'm going to do a portrait of her and a portrait of a really famous porn star, Seika, who was famous in the 70s and 80s. And she's from Richmond, where I grew up. And my old college roommate, she used to be his babysitter when he was like 10.
Oh my God.
So I'm going to do a couple of those. And then I'm not sure, but I think I'm going to work on a series about a friend of mine named Gary Smith, who played hockey. He was a goalie for almost 20 years in the NHL. And he's got tons of great stories. I think I'm going to do a series about him. It's going to be the next thing. But that won't be ready for like 2 years probably.
Right.
I'm gonna do a lot and like hopefully can put it together enough.
Are you a person who can, so for example, like the history of tofu, or like real and imagined, you focus on that through the lens of the art. Like, are you a person who needs to have a project in order to like dive in that way?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I can very rarely can I just pull off a one-off piece. I mean, I do when I'm bored, but I'd rather have a large project. And I can think about and like, how can I do this? And
Do you like talk about it to people along the way and sort of like get their feedback, or is it all inside and then you're like, welcome to this universe that I've created?
I will show. I have a handful of people that I will show like a piece in its progression, like when you can kind of see what it is, but it's not finished. I'll send them a photo. But I don't really talk about. I don't really ask for advice too much. I'll ask for technical advice, like what's the best. What paint should I use here?
Right.
You know, how do I make this color? Or like what brushes are the best? That kind of thing. Or what size should this piece be? But not like the plan of like what's going to be involved in the show.
I noticed earlier you had a little trouble owning the fact that you're an artist. How's that going for you?
Because I don't know. Yeah. It's something that I just feel like I'm doing now, you know. I don't know what I'm doing. That's what's great about it. You can do whatever you want, really. Like Julia said, you can't really do anything wrong, especially if you're like committed to it.
Right.
But I do lots of things wrong. Like, for instance, I draw on those cardboard boxes, which is the worst thing to draw on because they're so acidic that, I mean, they look good now, like 10 years later, they look okay, but over time, they're just going to get like sucked in. So I've had to like learn how to adjust to like put gesso down as a code. And I never heard of gesso. So I'm learning like that kind of stuff, technical.
Is it just cardboard boxes forever?
I just like it. I've got all this. I've got like fancy drawing paper that I don't like. I've got canvases. I've kind of practiced oil painting. And I put some paint in this last show. It's not just crayon and pencil. I just like the feel of starting off and doing like the pencil drawing first on that. You can erase it. I like that color brown. So I'd like to not do that anymore, but that's what as of now, it's what I'm most comfortable with.
Yeah. Well, you're an artist, you know, like you've had several shows.
I'm an artist. Can I start you off with some jalapeno poppers? I'm not really a waiter.
But a lot of times the way that goes is you do that and then you say you're an artist, but you've not made anything. Whereas you actually had, I saw it with my own eyes, a very successful show.
Yeah. When I first started working on this, I decided, I was like, I got to really wrap my head around this, you know, to try to like come up with something good. So I'm going to become a vegetarian like the first day of, I think I said it was going to be the first day of December. And that lasted like 5 days. I was just eating garbage. I wasn't eating meat, but I was eating like Pop-Tarts and microwave popcorn and cereal. And like not eating healthy at all. It was kind of messing with me. So I eased back in and then I was just like, you know what? This is kind of about farmers. I'm just going to wake up really early and work in the morning. So I've been getting up at like 4:30, 5 o'clock every morning and like going to work right away like a farmer would.
Doing it.
That's like my connection to like, you know, hard work for the show.
That's good. That seems more manageable.
I like working in the morning. Are you?
Oh, yeah.
I
get up early and then start doing stuff for a couple hours while the energy of the house is different.
Maybe that's what it is.
I think so. I think it's that for sure. I think the energy is like generally different. And I also like, I'm a pretty big, this sounds a little too woo-woo for me to enjoy that it's coming out of my own mouth. But I think that like when everyone's up, like the just like collective mental energy is different.
Yeah.
Than when it's just like, 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. It's like you and a handful of other people.
Exactly.
And like, it's not buzzing.
Yeah.
And I like that a lot.
I do too. I like watching the sun come up. I live like right by the river over there too.
Yeah.
And like just watching it come up, it's just turned from dark to orange to blue the morning while I'm working. I love that.
Man, the sunrises here are so great.
Great.
Just the best.
Yeah.
Like it's unreal. Every day it's a new form of unreal.
Yeah. I think we're kind of in a valley in Nashville. I think that's why we're somewhat protected by tornadoes quite often, is they kind of bounce around us.
Right.
But when they do fall down into the bowl,
they
get stuck in it and bang around.
Yeah, and apparently follow the same path more or less when they go.
Yeah, at Basement East. That was like the third time or something.
Yeah, it's unreal. I mean, when you put the like 3 paths from like the one in the 30s to the one in the 90s to the one a couple of years ago on top of each other, it's like virtually the same thing.
Yeah.
It's pretty crazy.
That was weird. That was like, God, what a weird week that was, because that was when COVID was like, COVID's going to shut things down for a while.
Right.
And remember the controversy was like the bars down on Lower Broadway wanted to stay open.
Yeah, totally. Kid Rock was the king of taking a stand.
Yeah, but we were all like, I know which side I was on. I was like, I'm going to do what I think is right, but we were just winging it.
Of course. Yeah, there
were a lot of mistakes made.
There's no pandemic preparation outside of when you're in it.
Yeah, like that overly washing your hands. Like,
right.
I mean, they made it sound like if you just kept your hands clean, you're going to be all right. It's an airborne disease. Wash your hands.
It feels so quaint in retrospect, or however many. I mean, I'm glad that people are using hand sanitizer, but like, how much hand sanitizer's around where people aren't just like, wear a fucking thing on your face?
Yeah, yeah.
Like we went out to Pigeon Forge not long ago, and like all the shops are just like riddled with hand sanitizer, and not a mask to be seen. What more do you want people to know about you before that are going to get people to go down to your show?
Yeah, come on down. Julia will. Pour you a glass of something. Saturday afternoons until 6, is when they're generally keep hours. And if you know Julia, call her and she can set up something with you and take you on a private tour. And, when I do these, I know like at best half of them will sell, but I have to put that other half that I know aren't going to sell. I have to work on those too, just because I'm trying to tell a story.
Right.
Like that baseball show I did, I threw in all of those political candidates from the 72 Democratic, all those candidates. And it's like, no one's going to buy this George Wallace one, but he's part of the story.
Yeah, totally.
So
did someone buy the George Wallace
No,
one?
of course
no one
not.
Bought it?
Of course not.
Is it still available?
It's got dust all over it. I'll give it to you.
I'll buy the Wallace one. I'm not a Wallace fan, but
no, he tried to make good near the end, so I'll give him credit for that. But
it's like those things. I love how especially going to like flea markets and stuff.
Yeah, my stuff would be great in flea markets.
I just love art that exists of things where you're like, why would someone paint that? And I love that. That's the best.
Yeah, it is the best.
That is my primary interest.
Yeah. That's kind of like what Trash Humpers is. Why would somebody make that?
I met a dude who, his name was Dennis Mcgrath. Really great guy. Photographer, skateboarder, was like around that crew of people when they made kids. He dated a bunch of porn stars in LA. I met him because I had a t-shirt of his. I saw on the back, it had his information. I called him and was like, hey, you want to hang out? He was like, sure. So I ended up hanging out with Dennis, who's a photographer. And like I said, he ended up dating a bunch of porn stars. And that was a different time for porn. There was like pre-OnlyFans, like when just like porn was like made by studios, stuff like that. He made all these zines about like the behind the scenes of that scene. And that is the most fascinating stuff to me, is like a behind the scenes of like what that culture was like, is a thing that I think like 99% of people would look at and be like, why would anyone care?
Yeah.
And I care very much.
Yeah.
I care about anything where someone's made art, and I'm like, and anyone asks like, why would someone make art about this? I'm primarily interested in that art.
Yeah. I know that Boogie Nights was great for that.
Yes, absolutely.
And so is that HBO. I'm bragging I used to be able to afford HBO. The Deuce.
Yeah,
That's a good amount of that.
That's a David Simon one, isn't it? I love that show. That show's a great show. It's based on like real brothers. Like that was a real.
Oh, is it really?
Yeah, that was like
they did a
real
great
scene.
job. I remember when I was in college, we went to New York on a field trip. Times Square was like that.
Sure.
And that was 1982.
Yeah,
And then now it's like
very different.
Very different.
It's very different. Even when you guys were there, when the time that you were describing,
I never went over there when I lived there.
But even like New York was so different. Than
it
is now. I mean,
Avenue C and D were really rough.
Right.
Now there's like a Whole Foods over there.
Right.
Some dude lunged at us one night with like a paper bag full of needles.
Yeah,
like
of course.
lunge. It's like, what the fuck, man? You're gonna ruin your needles.
I was pals with this guy named Jim Thompson who used to be in Gwar, was like one of the drummers. His name was Hans Orphis back in the 80s.
Yeah.
He was the sweetest dude. He reminded me of Fonzie in a lot of ways. Like he carried himself like, it was so funny to think that he was in Gwar, but he was in a cab one time and like he just like looked out the window and saw a guy walking towards the cab on his side, and they looked out the other window, saw someone walking towards them, and then someone came towards the front of the cab and so I was coming towards the back, and they just cornered it 4 ways and pulled him out of the cab and took all of his shit.
Holy shit.
And like it was like a coordinated 4-way attack. And yeah, Jim was like, that was terrible. It was like the most horrifying, like terrible experience. But he's like, it was a different time.
Yeah. Oh man, that's rough. I had no idea.
Oh man.
I know those guys a little bit. I went to college with Gwar.
Oh, did you really?
Yeah.
We're like Rocky, those guys?
Yeah. He was the one I knew the best. Yeah.
He seems like a fucking genius.
He was a cool dude.
Yeah.
He was real, like, he grew up in Northern Virginia, but he just seemed like such a redneck in a way.
Totally.
Like, but he's great. Like, that other band he was in, Death Piggy, where he played bass. Oh, my God. I love every time. They didn't play much, but, God, they were so good.
I ended up meeting Jerry Only from the Misfits on a plane once. I was waiting for the bathroom, and he came up behind me. And he was wearing, I mean, he was like such a friggin' dad. You know, he had like a crisp new Misfit shirt on, like tucked into his jeans. Like his jeans were high. And I was like, I love your shirt, man. He goes, it's my band. And I was like, yeah, I know. So I love your shirt. And so he and I ended up becoming friendly in a really funny way. Like we ended up seeing each other very randomly on like several trips. We came across each other. And then I ended up like helping him like do a fundraiser with his daughter for his like daughter's school or something. Like just like very funny cross section of things. And he used to want to like call and like talk about like what being a dad was like. Very funny. When Dave died in Gwar, he was like, asked me if I wanted to go to like the Gwar barbecue funeral that they had for him.
The Viking funeral.
Totally. And like the one gigantic regret that I have was not going to the Gwar barbecue.
It's pretty awesome.
Going to see Jerry Only.
I've not gone to that restaurant. Curious about it. Curious about that.
Yeah, I don't know. It sounds like they have a good time there.
Yeah. I remember that. I was stuck in an airport all day when I found out. I was bummed. They had just done, for the first time ever, it's like 2014, first time ever playing in Japan.
Yeah.
And he was so excited because he always wanted to play. So he got to do that, and he came back and then partied too hard one day. It was a shame.
I don't know what it is, but I have dived back into Gwar, I would say, because I was a huge Gwar fan when I was a kid. And I've dived back in a giant way in the past handful of months, and it's all like, particularly like the late 80s early 90s stuff is brilliant. I mean, it's like very, very, very smart, and I think, you know, a lot of people didn't recognize it because it was drippy and wet.
They had this cool warehouse where they lived and had their stuff. They would have parties over there, and it was like similar, I guess, to what Prince's Purple Paisley is, but if like Gwar took over that.
The dripping dynasty or something.
Yeah. Man, anything went back then.
Oh my
Those
God,
were the good old days. I don't know if I long to go back to that, and I'm glad I survived it. I wouldn't recommend it to anybody that's 22 to like do the stuff that I did.
Yeah.
Don't follow my path.
I don't know. Like I lived and continued, much less so now, but like I lived like a moderately very dangerous, you know, like 12 to 30.
Yeah.
And I don't encourage anyone to do it, but I'm grateful for that time.
I guess I am too, ultimately. Anyway. So Julia Martin Gallery, 444 Humphreys.
Beautifully pulled together.
In the Wedgwood, Houston area. Parking's a bitch, so if you have a helicopter, that would be the way to get down here.
You can do it. You're just going to walk a bit.
Yeah.
It's going to be great. Well, thanks so much, Kevin.
Alex, thank you so much.
Super
Wonderful
fun
to chat with you.
Awesome.
All right, everybody. That is it for this episode of Nashville Demystified. I appreciate you. Thank you for being here. Nashville Demystified is distributed, of course, by We Own This Town. Thanks so much to We Own This Town for doing that. Thank you so much to Kevin for sitting down for this interview several times. Thanks to Michael Eads for recording the interview. Thank you to Chris Burns for editing this episode. I appreciate what you're doing, Chris. And thank you again for listening. You can find me online at Twitter, Alex Steed. You can find me on Instagram, Alex Steed. You can find me on TikTok, Alex Steed. The show has handles, but not a whole lot happens outside of on Instagram. Demystified. You can find little pieces of history that I find and post there when they strike me. You better believe that they're weird. That's what I do. Weird history. It's my whole thing. All right. Thanks for being here, y'all. We will talk with Mary Mancini about Lucy's Record Shop next time. Take care.